Vlog 2. I'm going to talk about Jumble's Journey. So pretty much the game that I'm actually trying to accomplish is a 2.5D side-scrolling kind of puzzle adventure akin to Kirby Crystal Shards, something along those lines. So I'm just going to go over a little bit about the concept, the idea, what I want to do, what tools I'm using, kind of the time frame I want to get projects done by, maybe even the financing stuff, depending. I might put that in another video. So let's start about the idea. So the idea came pretty much because I was hanging out with a friend, and one of his friends, an animator, they're both animators, was with us, and she let me flip through one of her sketchbooks, and I came across a character. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting character. It's like, that's really cool. And all of a sudden the gears in my head start turning. I'm like, you know what? I'd like to buy that character from you. And she's like, oh. I'm like, yeah, I'll commission you to do me a turnaround, so a T-pose turnaround. And got that back. And this, surprisingly, was a few years ago. It was back when I was in college for game development. And what happened was I had the idea, and I ended up asking another friend of mine who's a 3D animator. I was like, hey, can you make a 3D model of this? And he did it. And then I kind of benched everything, kind of life got in the way, and I put kind of the project on hold. And so it kind of sat. And now with my newfound idea of actually pursuing this, my dream of making games, I decided to go back to this project because this project is a lot smaller in scale. It's not going to be a big 40-hour adventure or whatever. It's gonna be a small, just kind of personal thing. So the main idea behind Jumble's journey is Jumble, the character, is going to trying to figure out what they are, where they are, and are going to interact with all sorts of creatures along the way. Some of the main aspects and kind of the restrictions I put on myself is, one, I wanted a game that plays similar to Kirby Crystal Shards, especially from the perspective of where the camera moves, being able to see further down the line, see things in the distance. I want a focal point, so there'll be a great willow tree similar to the wise willow from Pocahontas. And but I want that to be a focal point that you can kind of always see in the background. The other thing is, I really kind of like the almost Tim Burton kind of look of the character. It reminded me a lot of the bad guy from Nightmare Before Christmas, and even some of the creepier elements from the movie 9. And so I was like, okay, so I want to kind of keep that. And what else do I want? Well, that stomach looks a little funny, and I don't really see a mouth. And so I was like, well, what if the stomach is a mouth, and this character stores stuff inside of themselves, and then use those items to kind of solve problems along the way. And because you can't jump, I was like, oh man, I need a lot of ways to solve problems and interesting things. So my design approach is similar to Snakes and Ladders. I want the idea that the player can traverse up and then come across something that would make them fall back down. So they'd have to figure out a way to traverse back up there or push past some sort of way around it. Another big aspect is I'm trying to come up with a game that doesn't rely totally on violence. Even if you look back at Mario, he jumps onto creatures and crushes them or kicks them around. It's still a violent kind of mechanic. And I was like, well, what if you can choose not to be violent to the creatures in the world? And in doing so, that maybe will help you make friends, they'll help you out. So that's kind of a big thing. So one of the other aspects is I have the emotion system. So it's a system where an acting and reacting system. So if you have Jumble comes across a creature and startles it, that creature will drop something that akin to maybe an orb. And that orb has fear in it. That creature is now feared, the creature runs away. Jumble picks up this fear orb and can use this fear orb to either activate it on themselves or activate it on a creature they come across to get different results. So pretty much if Jumble is faced with any of these emotional states, it's going to be reflected in a few things. So one, I'm going to probably set up a shader that's going to kind of blanket the screen in a different tone. So if you're scared, everything's going to probably be dark colors. All the creatures you're going to come across will actually be represented as a more creepy entity. and you won't be able to distinguish the difference between maybe a hostile or non-hostile creature that you come across because they'll all look the same when you're scared. Anger would be another one where everything would be tinted red, the music would change, Jumble will inadvertently be kind of act violent towards things. These, of course, would be states that would wear off over time. I have a few other kind of crazy ideas to throw in there, but these are just the base concepts. Other things is I want some boss battles. One of the interesting things, and I petitioned a few of my game friends and game developer friends, is have you ever come across a boss in a game where you don't have to fight them, but you do have to get past them to move along? And, we kind of talked and we found some different games, but it's not a very common thing. So it's like, okay, well, what if you had multiple ways of kind of getting past this boss from, taking the direct approach and smacking the snot out of them, or maybe finding out what they need to survive. Maybe you can lure them away or trick them in some manner. So these are things I wanted to really bring into the game. I wanted people to be able to think diversely of how they would move forward in the game. Some of the other big things that the game's going to have is I would like to create almost a circular or spiral type level design. So it's formed in rings. And so each ring, an outer ring where you can traverse around, and then paths that lead into the center ring, and so on and so forth until you can get to the center. And the center is where the Wise Willow is going to be, where your end goal is. Some of the other aspects of things that I want to kind of have in the game is I want to avoid dialogue. I want it to be very kind of visual. Also, it's just a way to save on localization. So the more text I cannot have in my game, the easier it is. Other aspects, I want kind of very good visual contrasts. I want I have friends that are colorblind, so I want to kind of make sure that they can play and they can see objects. A lot of games use highlighting of objects. I want to kind of make it so that you can tell that the object is something that you can interact with, but it's not abruptly obvious. You're not just be like, hey, this glowing thing pointing at this, pointing at that. Hey, look, type stuff. Tools that I'm going to be using. So I'm using Unity 3D. I'm also using an engine that already exists. So I'm using the Corgi engine. It had a lot of the stuff that I already kind of wanted to use. Right now I do have to write a little bit of other code to kind of get certain things to work, but it has a lot of the bases that I want. So that's really nice. I'm using Blender to do 3D models, and Clip Studio Art for doing my art pieces. Depending on how well my art design and my art skills kind of come back to me, will kind of justify if I'm going to continue doing it all myself or just do concept stuff and then pass that on down the road to a better artist. Because unfortunately, art is a big thing when it comes to making video games. If your art isn't clean or pretty or unique, your game can just get lost in the shuffle. Like you need to make it look good. And the biggest thing is that every part of your art needs to kind of work together. You can't have an amazing character and garbage background, or amazing background and your character's a little janky. Another one is animations. My game, I think I will try to kind of feature a lot of animations. Some of it I would like to kind of use code-based, kinematics to kind of make certain things work a little bit smoother. IKs are really, really nice. They help a lot when you're trying to do interesting stuff with objects. And yeah, so that's kind of a little rundown. So where I'm at right now is I'm kind of currently in the process of level design, trying to figure out the most appropriate way to make a level where you can't jump, and trying to design elements early on that are kind of intuitive, that you learn about the mechanics in the game without someone directly telling you what they are. I want you to just kind of, if you were to just pick up the game and start moving the character along the screen, you would interact with things that would be obvious to you, being like, hey, okay, that causes this event and that causes this event. And then you'll get the idea that, hey, I should do this instead of something like a tutorial level. I want it all to be open. Some of the more interesting things I've written up in my big GDD is endings. I really don't like super linear endings to games. I like the idea of a game that might have a couple endings. I don't need to have a bajillion endings, but a few endings would be nice. And those endings will be based on how you kind of progress through the game. One of the most interesting things I can remember in recent date was Grand Theft Auto. You beat the end of the Grand Theft Auto 5. You beat the end of that game, and it scrolls you kill count and what you get rated as a person based on what you did, how many people you ran over, stuff like that. I'm not gonna that kind of ridiculous in my game, but I wouldn't mind, tracking how the player interacts with the creatures and the environment in the world, and kind of being like, hey, this what you did affected the world. Another thing, what happens when you die? So right now the mechanic that I'm looking at is almost a time ellipse. I don't really want to force a player to go back and redo stuff, but I also don't want it to feel like you're an immortal. I want it to make it so that it's like, okay, something happens. Your character gets hurt, your character goes to sleep. When they wake up, the world is advanced a little bit. So if you've moved a block, that block has moved. It's not going to change where it went. But maybe a creature that you startled is now back where it was before because, time's passed. There's no scary thing there. So those are a couple of the kind of things I'm working on. And yeah, so this is Devblog 2. Hopefully next time I'll put a little bit of gameplay. Well, that's not what I was expecting. Oh yeah, hopefully next time I'll show a little bit of gameplay, maybe a little bit of the janky 3D models I'm working on, maybe some other concept art. Thanks. Have a great day.